The British brig Dei Gratia was about 400 miles east of the Azores on December 5, 1872, when crew members spotted a ship adrift in the choppy seas. Captain David Morehouse was taken aback to discover that the unguided vessel was the Mary Celeste, which had left New York City 8 days before him and should have already arrived in Genoa, Italy. He changed course to offer help. Morehouse sent a boarding party to the ship. Below decks, the ship's charts had been tossed about, and the crewmen's belongings were still in their quarters. The ship's only lifeboat was missing, and one of its 2 pumps had been disassembled. 3.5 feet of water was sloshing in the ship's bottom, though the cargo of 2701 barrels of industrial alcohol was largely intact. There was a 6-month supply of food and water, but not a soul to consume it. Thus was born one of the most durable mysteries in nautical history. What happened to the 10 people who had sailed aboard the Mary Celeste? Through the decades, a lack of hard facts has only spurred speculation as to what might have taken place. Theories have ranged from mutiny to pirates to sea monsters to killer waterspouts. Arthur Conan Doyle's 1884 short story based on the case posited a capture by a vengeful ex-slave. A 1935 movie featured Bela Lugosi as a homicidal sailor. Now, a new investigation drawing on modern maritime technology and newly discovered documents has pieced together the most likely scenario. I love the idea of mysteries, but you should always revisit these things using knowledge that has since come to light, says Anne McGregor, the documentarian who launched the investigation and wrote, directed, and produced the true story of the Mary Celeste, partly with funding from Smithsonian Networks. The ship began its fateful voyage on November 7, 1872, sailing with 7 crewmen and Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah, and the couple's 2-year-old daughter Sophia. The 282-ton brigantine battled heavy weather for 2 weeks to reach the Azores, where the ship log's last entry was recorded at 5 a.m. on November 25th. After spotting the Mary Celeste 10 days later, the Dei Gratia crewmen sailed the ship some 800 miles to Gibraltar, where a British Vice Admiralty court convened a salvage hearing which was usually limited to determining whether the salvagers, in this case the Dei Gratia crewmen, were entitled to payment from the ship's insurers. But the Attorney General in charge of the inquiry, Frederick Solly Flood, suspected mischief and investigated accordingly. After more than 3 months, the court found no evidence of foul play. Eventually, the salvagers received a payment, but only 1/6 of the $46,000 for which the ship and its cargo had been insured, suggesting that the authorities were not entirely convinced of the Dei Gratia crew's innocence. The story of the Mary Celeste might have drifted into history if Conan Doyle hadn't published J. Habakkuk Jepson's statement in 1884. His sensationalistic account, printed in Cornhill magazine, set off waves of theorizing about the ship's fate. Even Attorney General Solly Flood revisited the case, writing summaries of his interviews and notes, but the mystery remained unsolved. McGregor picked up the trail in 2002. "There's so much nonsense written about this legend," she said. "I felt compelled to find the truth." McGregor's 4 previous investigative documentaries, including the Hindenburg disaster, Probable Cause, 2001, applied modern forensic techniques to historical questions. "There are obvious limitations for historic cases," she says. "But using the latest technology, you can come to a different conclusion." For her Mary Celeste film, McGregor began by asking what didn't happen. Speculation concerning sea monsters was easy to dismiss. The ship's condition, intact and with full cargo, seemed to rule out pirates. One theory bandied about in the 19th century held that crew members drank the alcohol on board and mutinied. After interviewing crewmen's descendants, McGregor deemed that scenario unlikely. Another theory assumed that alcohol vapors expanded in the Azores' heat and blew off the main hatch, prompting those aboard to fear an imminent explosion. But McGregor notes that the boarding party found the main hatch secured and did not report smelling any fumes. True, she says, 9 of the 1701 barrels in the hold were empty, but the empty 9 had been recorded as being made of red oak, not white oak like the others. Red oak is known to be a more porous wood and therefore more likely to leak. As for that homicidal sailor played by Lugosi in The Mystery of the Mary Celeste, he may have been drawn from 2 German crewmen, brothers Volkert and Boy Lorenzen, who fell under suspicion because none of their personal possessions were found on the abandoned ship. But a Lorenzen descendant told McGregor that the pair had lost their gear in a shipwreck earlier in 1872. They had no motive, McGregor says. Documentarian Anne McGregor and oceanographer Phil Richardson used historical weather data to plot the ship's course. Scott McGregor. After ruling out what didn't happen, McGregor confronted the question of what might have. Abandoning a ship in the open sea is the last thing a captain would order and a sailor would do. But is that what Captain Briggs ordered? If so, why? His ship was seaworthy. It wasn't flooded or horribly damaged, says Phil Richardson, a physical oceanographer at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts and an expert in derelict vessels, whom McGregor enlisted in her investigation. The Discovery crew sailed it, so it was in really good shape. Briggs's life before the Mary Celeste offered no clues, says McGregor, who visited the captain's hometown of Marion, Massachusetts, and interviewed descendants of Arthur Briggs, the 7-year-old son the Briggses had left behind so he could attend school. McGregor learned that the captain was experienced and respected in shipping circles. There was never a question that he would do something irrational, she says. Did Briggs then have a rational reason to abandon ship? McGregor figured that if she could determine the precise spot from which Briggs, his family, and crew abandoned ship, she might be able to shed light on why. She knew from the transcriptions of the Mary Celeste's log slate, where notations were made before they were transcribed into the log, that the ship was 6 miles from and within sight of the Azores island of Santa Maria on November 25th. She knew from the testimony of the De Gracia crew that 10 days later, the ship was some 400 miles east of the island. McGregor asked Richardson to work backward and create a path between these 2 points. Richardson said he would need water temperatures, wind speeds, and wind directions at the time, data that McGregor found in the International Comprehensive Ocean Atmosphere Data Set, ICOADS, a database that stores global marine information from 1784 to 2007 and is used to study climate change. She, her yachtsman husband Scott, and Richardson drew on the data to determine whether the Mary Celeste could have drifted from its recorded location on November 25th to where the De Gracia crew reported finding it on December 5th. Their conclusion, yes, it could have, even without a crew to sail it. We found out it basically just sailed itself, Richardson says. At that point, McGregor considered the fact that a captain would most likely order a ship abandoned within sight of land. Since Santa Maria was the last land for hundreds of miles, it seemed safe to assume that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned the morning of November 25th after the last log entry was written. But why? On this point, McGregor says, Attorney General Solly Flood's notes are crucial. He wrote that he saw nothing unusual about the voyage until the last 5 days, which is why he transcribed the ship's log starting 5 days from the end. The ship's log is believed to have been lost in 1885, so those transcriptions provided the only means for McGregor and Richardson to plot the course and positions logged for the ship. The two then reconsidered those positions in light of ICOAD's data and other information on sea conditions at the time. Their conclusion, Briggs was actually 120 miles west of where he thought he was, probably because of an inaccurate chronometer. By the captain's calculations, he should have sighted land 3 days earlier than he did. Solly Flood's notes yielded one other piece of information that McGregor and Richardson consider significant. The day before he reached the Azores, Briggs changed course and headed north of Santa Maria Island, perhaps seeking haven. The night before the last entry in the ship's log, the Mary Celeste again faced rough seas and winds of more than 35 knots. Still, McGregor reasons, rough seas and a faulty chronometer wouldn't, by themselves, prompt an experienced captain to abandon ship. Was there something else? McGregor learned that on its previous voyage, the Mary Celeste had carried coal and that the ship had recently been extensively refitted. Coal dust and construction debris could have fouled the ship's pumps, which would explain the disassembled pump found on the Mary Celeste. With the pump inoperative, Briggs would not have known how much seawater was in his ship's hull, which was too fully packed for him to measure visually. At that point, says McGregor, Briggs, having come through rough weather, having finally and belatedly sighted land and having no way of determining whether his ship would sink, might well have issued an order to abandon ship. But, like Attorney General Solly Flood, McGregor can't leave the story of the Mary Celeste alone. She is continuing her investigation for a book. The research goes on, she says, because I have been touched by the story, as I hope other people will be.